A while back, I was playing in the Red Bull Campus Clutch tournament, and something rather interesting happened to me. One of the players on the other team dropped the Ion Phantom skin after being killed, and after I picked it up, for whatever reason, I suddenly had all this confidence to peek essentially any angle at any time. And obviously I didn't do this immediately, but slowly as I began to peek more and more, I genuinely began to believe that all this confidence had come solely from using the Ion skin. And it kind of made sense. Before this, I utterly hated the way the base Phantom looked, and now I was climbing at the leaderboard, getting kill after kill. And I really was using the Vandal in some small ways simply because I liked how it looked, and because of that, was more comfortable with it. All this made me think, what does the placebo effect have to do with all of this? Why is it suddenly that after using a skin that doesn't add anything to the gun, was I playing better? What even is the placebo effect? And with it, could I use it to get even better? I've always thought the placebo effect is an interesting concept, especially when applied to things outside of medicine. And what it is essentially a beneficial effect from something that can't really be correlated with beneficial effects, such as in medicine, it could be things like sugar pills that make you recover. Now, in gaming, it generally means something a little bit more mental. I think the best example of this are the three most common placebo effects in Valorant. The meme having to do with the Prime Vandal that makes you rank up faster, your crosshair can be another example, and finally, which hand you use to shoot in game. Now I want to break this video up into three parts. First I'm going to go into discuss those three things that I just mentioned, then I'm going to go into some of the more odd effects of it. One example being a player using something that is statistically worse only because it feels better, and in a way, maybe even makes them play better. And then to finish it off, I want to go into the most interesting part, at least for me. Why is it that something that literally adds nothing to skill or to the game can actually make you a better player? So to begin, let's get into some of those three things that I talked about first. So I think the crosshair and the left versus right-handed points are pretty easy to explain. Using your left hand versus your right hand in game kind of just goes into a separate category. Because here you almost take something from the real world and put it into Valorant. Almost everyone out there is either left-handed or right-handed, so that means you're generally going to play better with whatever hand you prefer. This one's probably the most simple of the three, and it's also quite comparable to that of the crosshair. It really is just an overall preference, not placebo. Sure, there are crosshairs out there that are a little bit less optimal, but most of the time it's more about what you prefer rather than what is quote-unquote the best. However, looking at crosshairs, there is one thing that can be somewhat attributed to the placebo effect, changing the crosshair around. Personally, I changed between two different crosshairs and maybe even on a rare occasion three, and I use these two most of the time, but also this one if I'm not really feeling either of them. Notice how one of the two is smaller than the other, and this goes into why I want to change it. For example, if my aim is feeling somewhat good, I sometimes switch to a smaller one to try and really hit those precise shots. Maybe if for whatever reason I'm feeling a little bit more aggressive, I might switch to the more open one for close range. Or in some cases, if I'm just really not feeling anything and I'm just not playing well at all, I switch off from whatever I'm using, regardless how I feel. And I can't tell you how many times this has actually helped. Switching my crosshair mid-game has sometimes drastically changed how I'm playing for whatever reason. It's almost as if changing something, even something as small as a little pixel, almost made my brain just tick, and suddenly I was competitive again. It really is all mental, and this right here is proof of it. Changing your crosshairs isn't like some Black Ops Zombies perk that literally gives you an advantage. To someone you're playing against, it looks like you just came alive out of nowhere, and you are the same player, yet now you are far better. The next idea is kind of hard to get your head around, and it is using something that is statistically worse, yet feels a lot better. I think it doesn't really apply right now, but in early days of Valorant, looking back, I can now see how bad the OG Vandal was. Its shot was so much slower than the Phantom and for such little benefit, and yet I still used it like so many others. Maybe if those of us that used Vandal had switched to Phantom during that time, we would have liked a little bit better today. But even still, there is Immortal, and there were Immortal and even Radiant Vandal users. Perhaps there were less of them, of course, but that just is the mere fact that they were using something that was literally not as good as something else by a long shot, and that is incredibly interesting to me. I think a lot of it has to do with prior experience coming into Valorant. Valorant was still such a new game that no one really knew what was going to be good and what was going to be bad. Some people viewed that one-shot headshot as an ideal thing and picked that over the Phantom. But none of this really explains what I think is sort of the ultimate placebo effect, and really the reason I made this video. Why did I suddenly get better when using the Ion skin? I know that the skin does not add a single thing in terms of skill or advantage, yet it made me play far better. I think the answer lies in the mentality of comfort. Imagine you are playing with the ugliest skin imaginable, maybe not even a skin, maybe just a black box as your weapon. And this idea and this constant view of something that not only makes no sense, but is ugly to look at, is almost a thread in your mind as you're playing. It's like trying to read a book while someone is talking on their phone in the background. In a way, it's just kind of distracting. But not really, because you know it is still the same gun, but suddenly when you remove this thread and you use a beautiful skin that you love, you become far more comfortable. It almost goes out of your mind, and thus, you play better. I said at the beginning that I used the Vandal somewhat because I liked how it looked more, and I think that was the reason I went with the Vandal instead of the Phantom, even if I knew it was an objectively better gun. It simply made me feel better while playing, and thus, I played better.